Harriet Tyce, welcome to the Great Big Book Club. How are you?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. Thank you very much for asking me on.
Look at your library.
Yeah, I wish I could say that I've read everything, but I'm afraid I haven't. No, we had a long, thin room that used to be a loo and a little office, and so we knocked it through and put shelves in, and yeah, it's filled with a sort of a testament of everything I might yet read one day in my future. But I do feel very lucky with it, and I
You
hope
look
it's a
very
good
impressive.
background. It's a good Zoom background, I think.
I
Good.
almost thought it wasn't real, actually, to start off with.
No, I'm afraid it is. And the window at the background, I'm not sure if that's off-putting with the light, but I'll try and keep my head still. So
No, it gives you a saintly halo, which is part of it.
we like stately halos. That sounds marvelous.
So congratulations on The Lies You Told,
Thank
out
you.
out this summer, one of the most anticipated summer reads.
Yikes.
Very, very, very exciting. It is the story of Sadie Roper and her daughter Robin. Tell me a bit more about the plot, and obviously don't give too much.
Yes, of course. Well, they've moved back to London very, very unexpectedly and suddenly because of a situation that's arisen. They've been living in New York with Sadie's husband. That relationship has broken down and they have fled to London, where, as the result of a toxic legacy from her very poisonous mother, who died some years ago, they have access to a house that's not in a particularly great state. And they have effectively a place at a private school paid for by the poisonous mother, who has allowed access to any kind of funds in the house only on the condition that Robin is sent to this very prestigious North London girls' school called Asham's. And they have managed somehow to swing a place there at the last minute, which has been the cue for Sadie to take Robin and come and set up in this cold, unwelcoming house, in what ends up being really quite a cold, unwelcoming school environment. I had a lot of fun with the schoolgate politics, as
Oh,
you
the
might.
bitchy school gate is just brilliant. These awful competitive mothers with their awful competitive children. Did you have any particular school in mind when you were writing this?
Oh no, just a conglomeration of much. And I think that, I mean, obviously I've sort of slightly stepped things up for, it makes it a lot more fun as a story. But, I think any of us who've had children at schools, and it doesn't matter what the school is, that there is always an aspect of competition and neurosis. And I think that I was really very, there's a line at the beginning that that Sadie is thinking about poor Robin and how glad that Sadie is that she never has to negotiate the politics of the playground again. Which little does she know, but actually it's just as neurotic when you start back as a parent as well as it is for a child. And I know that when my children, I have teenagers now, but I know that when they had started at school, that I did find myself flashing back to all of the feelings that I used to have when I was at school myself, and just how tricky that all is. And equally, I don't think it's something that's specific to. I mean, there is a unique kind of neurosis when you're also dealing with your children, because you're protective for your children. You're kind of quite raw. There's nerves going on there. But really, when you start in any new environment, whether you start in a new office or a new society or whatever it is, that suddenly there is a kind of a weighing up and a paranoia about, do they like me? Are they going to speak to me? What's going on with this? And that was something that I really wanted to, that anxiety was something I really wanted to play with. So yes, Robin starts at the school, and the fun and games commence. And at the same time as Sadie is trying to negotiate all these difficult mothers. She's also trying to restart her career as a criminal barrister. She's been away from the game for probably about 10 years or so because of being in America, not working, having a young child. But now that she's come back, she wants to get her career up and running. And so dealing with Chambers and the case that she's given is a subplot that sort of weaves its way through.
It weaves its way brilliantly through, I have to say. But it is I love the school gate for me, because obviously your background is as a barrister. Were you a criminal barrister?
I was, yes, I was a criminal barrister. But I did that for about 10 years, and then I left when I had kids, because it's not a very flexible career. You can't really sort of factor in school drop-offs and pickups and all the rest of it. So yeah, I stopped.
And were you defence or
primarily defence? I mean, I did prosecute on occasion, but my chambers had more defence work. So, and also bearing in mind, I mean, I'd only done it for 10 years, so I was very much at the junior end, and I was just sort of grunting my way across the southeast with a wheelie bag, dealing with magistrates' courts most of the time. But yeah, I mean, prosecution is a different beast, and yeah, it's not, you don't have as much autonomy. That you have to be very answerable to the Crown Prosecution Service, who have very firm ideas about how they like things to be run. Whereas when you're defending, once you actually get to court, of course you're following your client's instructions, but you don't have to sort of second guess every step of the way with what they want. So no, it was fun though. It was fun, but I'm quite glad I don't do it anymore. It's very stressful.
I bet. But how many, obviously, because with your smash hit, the previous book, Blood Orange, she was also a barrister as well. So how do you think it's been helpful to have that as a background? I mean, you've encountered so many different people. I mean, it's just almost like a writer's dream in a weird way to be in that profession.
Yes, I think it's been immensely helpful, because, I mean, for a start, well, Blood Orange, as you say, is centred on, it's really much more about the life of Chambers and the life of a barrister than, I mean, that I won't say in The Lies You Told that her being a barrister is incidental, but I think that the core story that runs through The Lies You Told deals more with the school. But in terms of both, really, I mean, there's a level of kind of lived experience which would be very difficult to replicate in research, and also, you know, quite honestly, extremely time consuming, and I'm fundamentally quite lazy. You know, there's a reason I don't write historical fiction, because actually trying to get to grips with that world would be something that would be immensely difficult. So I think that, I mean, really, were it not for having had that career experience in the first place, I wouldn't have written these books, if that makes sense. I mean, I have to say, though, I think that I've probably come to the end of my knowledge. I haven't practiced for 15 years. So, you know, there've been a huge number. I mean, things I think, aspects of it stay exactly the same. Certainly the feedback I've had from barristers who've read Blood Orange is that I am not presenting a world that's over and past. But in terms of legal developments, in terms of the way that courts themselves run, with, you know, how things now go online, with the effect of austerity and the cuts to the Ministry of Justice, the cuts to legal aid, the way that people are being forced out of the profession, the delays, the huge pressures, these aren't things I can speak about with any authority now, because those changes have taken place over the last 15 years. And I think that we start getting to a point when I think book 3, there will not be barristers in the same sort of a way, because, you know, I know when I'm beat, and I know when I don't know anymore. But it's been fun. It's been fun sort of looking at, because of course what I did do in terms of research for both books was an aspect of legal research to make sure that, as far as I could, I got the law right for the trials as I described them. And that was a nice sort of throwback to work that I used to do. And yeah, I enjoyed doing that. But I think there comes a point when you have to say, well, 10 years has given me 2 books, and I think that's pretty good as research goes.
Well, 2 brilliant books as well. Did you steal any of the characters that you met along your way, or borrow any of the stories, or how impactful was your previous job, do you think?
I would say that in terms of actual clients, not really. I mean, there's an overall feeling of sort of sympathy to people's social situations, in the sense that, if someone's shoplifting because of addiction, then the pre-sentence report that's prepared by probation is going to demonstrate that it isn't just a sort of a black and white, that's a bad person, send them to jail. And as I say, certainly the lived experience of trekking around from court to court, and what the atmosphere was like with other barristers. I mean, other barristers I've certainly nicked a bit more in terms of some of the attitudes that have come through, but I couldn't possibly comment about that. The cases themselves, I mean, as I say again, I was really pretty junior when I left, and so I hadn't really dealt with anything that was that complex. What I have done more when it's come to the actual cases that I've described is I've borrowed those from newspapers. I mean, that they're all sort of inspired by real life trials that have been reported, because I think that, I mean, aside from anything else, I wouldn't be allowed to use anything of mine because of confidentiality. But
yeah, that's true, yeah.
But really, though, I did work on more sort of interesting cases for people supervisors, in terms of murders or sexual assaults or whatever. But my own practice was mostly shoplifting and people travelling on fake tickets, being prosecuted by the British Transport Police. And I once got very much to grips about, the ways that you can drive drunk round a supermarket car park that render it legal. Not you can't really, which is not the stuff of which interesting fiction is made, I have to say.
Well, were you surprised about the massive hit that Blood Orange was?
Yeah.
And it was an international bestseller, Rich and Judy Book Club, 22 languages, and it's been optioned for a film. I mean, that's your first book.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm still in shock that it's because it's still going. It's still going. I mean, it's amazing. It's still, in the run up to The Lies You Told being published, it's still very much a live kind of well-selling book that people are talking about. And yeah, I mean, I wrote it when I was doing an MA at the University of East Anglia, and I sort of wrote most of it sitting in bed, and I had an expectation. I knew that I was going to have about 12 readers because I had the rest of my MA cohort and I had my tutors, and I hoped I might get an agent through it. That was the sort of the main aim of doing, of getting better and hoping that I might get an agent. But beyond that, I didn't have no expectations and not even hopes. I mean, because I'd spent so many years trying to get an agent that I hadn't really thought, that became the golden ticket, was get an agent. And if you had said to me, well, what happens after you get an agent? I'd be like, I don't know, it doesn't matter. I can say I've got an agent. That's all I need. So when my agent, Veronique, then started to talk about submitting the manuscript to publishers, I was like, oh, that's a thing, isn't it? And that, I sort of didn't, I think that I've got a bit better at having processed it. I mean, writing The Lies You Told during the course of all of this happening was an interesting, it was a real sort of skill to try and learn how to tune out the noise of expectation and people's, I'm very proud of the fact that I've completed it, actually, because I feel that there's a lot of expectation that was unanticipated. And I know that there are readers, you know, writing something. It's the first time I've ever written something where I know that people are kind of quite keen to read it, and thinking, oh God, they're going to be disappointed. It's not like Blood Orange. I mean, I know aspects of it are, but I've moved away from, you know, the sex and booze of the first book. And thinking, well, if that's why people read that one and they liked it, and you know, it's been interesting. And I say I think I'm processing it, but it's still, you know, you couldn't ask for more for your first book. You
really couldn't. And but also it must be very nerve-wracking to be writing this, because while Blood Orange is doing so incredibly well, because you end up, I mean, the idea of stage fright, the idea of, you know, everyone now knows who you are. This is going to be there's a huge weight of expectation on it.
Yeah.
I mean,
I might just go and put my head in a bag and never get out of bed again. No, I mean, I think it's I've done it. I mean, I've got through the hurdles that I've got through. I've you know, I've got through all the edits. It's there. It's a, you know, it's a, at the moment, this is a proof copy, so this is still full of errors, but I didn't even get the right number of jury members in this proof version. My father read it and he said, Harriet, he's a retired judge, and he said, Harriet, you've got 11 jury members. Because I'd said 8 and 3 and they're actually 12, and I was like, oh, so we've managed to change that. It's all right. It was a bit of I told you it's been a long time since I was actually a criminal barrister. It's bad, that though.
That's brilliant. I'm glad you managed to get the correct amount of jury members. That's
thing. That was a bit of a that was quite a duffer. That was a duffer moment. It was not good. But no, I've no idea how. I've no idea how this is. I mean, the early responses have been, I think, pretty positive to The Lies You Told. I mean, the problem is, of course, all I ever hear is the negative, and all I ever see is the negative, and that, you know, you can have one person just going, well, I preferred Blood Orange, and like, oh my God, everyone's going to hate it. But I actually, Rosie, my publicist, she gave me a very sensible talking to, which was just, well, you know, some people who loved Blood Orange might not love this as much, but other people who didn't love Blood Orange, and, you know, and believe me, there are a number of those people who found the protagonist difficult or didn't approve of the decisions that she made, and that they, I think, perhaps will find The Lies You Told a more acceptable read on a moral basis. It's less ambiguous. It's, I think, rather more black and white, and that and I was very keen to make Sadie likable. I mean, I just wanted to prove that I was able to write a likable character who actually,
you could do it,
who made decent decisions and was a thoroughly nice person, and that there was no moment that you'd sort of go, oh goodness, no, she's terrible, I'd like to give her a good shake. Which I have to say, incidentally, was a response that really shocked me about Blood Orange, you know, which is a book that's all about domestic violence. And there've been a fair, you know, there's a sizable minority of reader reviews which has said I wanted to give her a good shake all the way through. And you just think, that's horrible. You don't go shaking people. Terrible way to reply. You know, you just can't. Anyway, yeah, I don't think they'll be.
Do they learn anything from the book? I mean, do you know what I mean?
I think that there's a small number of people, I think, who just make a decision at the start, because obviously she's, you know, she's up to no good. That's certainly, I mean, it opens with, you know, it opens with all of that.
The creative writing course at the University of East Anglia seems to create these incredibly brilliant writers. What is it about that course?
Well, I didn't do the crazy one. You see, the crazy one's the prose fiction, where they have such subsects as ludic, and then they go off and they do short stories and all sorts of stuff, which is, you know, great. But I knew I wanted to write crime fiction, and I knew I wanted to write psychological thrillers, and I was really chary of having anything to do with writing, well, with creative writing MAs, precisely because I thought they'd be full of very serious people doing sort of interlocking short stories on an Olympian basis of rules, where it's, you know, it's all kind of meandering nothing, well, not nothing, but, you know, beautiful. And I wanted to write something which made people want to keep turning the pages. And I eventually came to a point where, you know, I'd had a lot of rejections with things I'd tried to write before, and I thought, well, maybe, yeah, it's time. Let's see if I can try and get onto this at least. And I went onto their website, and as if it had been designed specially for me, there was a crime fiction specialist creative writing MA, which had a superb reading list, and was also, what was so great was that it was part-time. So it was over 2 years, distance, so mostly online, with only going to Norwich 3 weekends a year, which, not that, you know, going to Norwich more regularly would be an issue, but weekly is actually quite hard to go from, you know, to travel up. And when, you know, you're dealing with kids and you're dealing with sort of all of that kind of family life, I think that it would have been difficult to do something, you know, sort of even in that structure, whereas this structure was absolutely perfect. I mean, in a way, with the pandemic, I've looked at discussion about people's degree courses shifting online. And I mean, let's take out of it the social aspect for students, which I know is so important. But in fact, though, studying online in itself is not necessarily a terrible conclusion, and it certainly opens it up to people who've got slightly more complicated life arrangements, you know, if you do have commitments and if you do have, you know, caring responsibilities. But it was the point of what you had to sort of complete for the course was a whole manuscript, a whole novel. I mean, of publishable quality, they said, you know, whatever that, but, you know, you have to sort of have some kind of way of measuring it. And that was also very appealing, that, you know, to come out of it with a complete manuscript which had been workshopped throughout, was something that, you know, to see something from the beginning through to the end seemed to be a hugely positive thing to do. And it was during the course of that 2 years that I wrote Blood Orange from start to finish. And there was no messing around with different disciplines, or with, which actually now, I mean, I'm sort of thinking it might be quite fun to try and write a script for a play or something. I mean, not screenplays. I mean, that I know is a level of expertise that's just completely different. But it could be, and someone asked me for a short story, and I sort of looked at them blankly and said, I've written one short story in my life 10 years ago. I've no idea how you do that. But I'll go away and read a book, and maybe I'll find out how. But it was a great experience. I mean,
an amazing story. Were you the star pupil? I mean, did anyone else get stuff published in that your gang of 12 or however?
I mean, I suppose mine, but I was the first to get a publishing deal. And I mean, and it was quite big off the blocks, because it was a preempt, and it happened within 10 days of it going on submission, and it happened just before the course itself ended. So I think that it was a bit of a like, oh, but in fact, I mean, one of my fellow students had a really good way of looking at it, which was that it just, everyone, you know, you know, you can't look on things as being, luck isn't a finite resource, and these opportunities aren't finite. So just because one person gets a publishing deal doesn't mean that another person isn't going to get a publishing deal. I know if it had not been me, because I think I do look on things as a scarcity, that I would have been going, well, she's got it, so I'm never going to get it now, I may as well give up. But that's not necessarily a terribly constructive way of looking at it. And that now there are, I'm trying to think, of the 11 of us, about, I think 5 of us are published now, or going to be. That there's Mull Nygate has written a spy novel, A Righteous Spy, and then Trevor Wood has written his debut was published in March, and he's one of Val McDermid's New Blood panel for Harrogate, which is a phenomenal achievement. And Kate Simmons is in fact publishing her second novel with Serpent's Tail with their new Viper imprint in August as well. And Jenny Stone has written a very funny book about Essex and cake making with a cherry pie is the name of the detective, with some of the best puns I've ever seen. And so that's just a one sort of portion of us. I mean, and of course people don't just get published sort of straight off the blocks, that there's a kind of a consistent steady progress. So but I mean, it's hard to know what what is the magic of UEA. I don't know. I mean, it's selective. It's well taught. I think maybe one of the things about writing courses is that there is a level of commitment. You are, no one's doing a writing course if they're not serious about what they're doing. But that is not to say that it's the only route, which is something I think is important to bear in mind. But I mean, obviously it was a transformational experience for me. So
totally. I mean, did you always want to write? Were you, I mean, was the barrister, being a barrister, was that just a sort of pit stop on the way to writing, or?
I hadn't really, I mean, when I was a teenager, I wrote poetry and I was keen on that. But then my English teacher, I just discovered Sylvia Plath, and he'd quite liked what I was doing before. And then he read the post Plath and he was like, "You've become very self-indulgent." And I thought, well, yeah. And I looked at it because I found the book in a box recently, and I mean, it's terrible, it's utter schlock. But it put me off completely for years. I mean, I'm not quite sure why I became a barrister, but I was doing an English degree and I wasn't really, I think in retrospect, I would have made better use of the careers service and actually found out what options were available. But at the time, I think I just thought, well, you could be a teacher, and I didn't think I'd be a very good teacher. Or you could be a journalist, and I didn't think I wanted necessarily to be a journalist, because in my head at that point, being a journalist was just sort of being someone who worked for the Sun and hid in people's bins, which is, of course, nonsensical. And then the third option was, oh, I'll do law then. And so I did a law conversion course and was a barrister. And yeah, it was so writing wasn't something that really occurred to me until a friend of mine, he went to Royal Holloway for their creative writing MA, and I think he must have started that about 12 years ago. And he told me, and my first reaction was one of absolute fury. I was really angry. And of course I had to just sit with that for a while. And then I thought, well, why on earth am I so angry? What an extraordinary reaction to someone else going and following their dream. And I'm like, oh, you want to write, don't you? That's what this is. That was jealousy. It wasn't anger at all. It was just pure envy. And and I started to look at MAs, and you have to have a 5,000 words extract that you can submit, and I was like, I didn't have a thing. So it was at that point that I then started, and it just sort of kept building up, really.
Well, you've been incredibly successful, Harriet. I mean, unbelievably, and huge congratulations on Blood Orange, and also this new, fantastic, brilliant one called The Lies You Told, which is out this summer. And to say it's deeply anticipated is an understatement.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on.
Thanks very much indeed.